Two true scary stories from Reddit. Creepypasta farm mysteries that will haunt you forever. Rural America often conjures images of peace. Golden fields stretching endlessly beneath a cerulean sky. The soft hum of crickets blending with the rustling of corn stalks, and a horizon unmarred by the chaos of urban sprawl. It's the kind of quiet simplicity that people dream of escaping to. A refuge where time moves slower and life feels kinder. But as I stand here on the worn porch of an old farmhouse, gazing out at the vast, unbroken expanse of land, I'm reminded that the quietest places often keep the loudest secrets. The gentle breeze that brushes the tall grass seems to carry whispers, echoes of stories that no one dares to speak aloud. Beneath the charm of rustic barns and picket fences lies something darker, something waiting just beyond the edge of sight. Growing up, I heard tales of strange occurrences on farms like this, stories passed down in hushed tones, dismissed as rural folklore or the ramblings of lonely minds. But over time I began to see a pattern. These weren't just stories. They were accounts, fragments of real events that people had experienced, their terror lingering like a shadow over the land. It's in places like this where the mundane and the macabre intertwine, where the unexplainable takes root in the soil and grows alongside the crops. The people who lived through these events don't tell their stories for fame or pity. They share them because the weight of keeping them secret is too much to bear. And so, I've come to share two such stories. Accounts of ordinary farms hiding chilling truths beneath their weathered exteriors. The first story is about a family seeking a fresh start, only to uncover a secret network of terror operating in the dead of night. The second delves into a couple's discovery of unspeakable horrors buried within the very earth they hoped would bring them peace. As we venture into these accounts, remember this: every chilling detail, every spine-tingling moment comes from real experiences shaped by fear and forged in truth. These farms may seem far removed from your life, but their shadows stretch further than you might think. And with that, let's step off this porch into the fields where the real stories begin. Story 1. The Midnight Shipment. The McAllister family arrived at the farm just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the vast fields of the Midwest. The farmhouse, though weathered and worn, stood with a kind of stubborn charm. Its white paint was peeling, and the porch steps creaked. But to the McAllisters, it was a promise of a fresh start. For David and Lisa, the parents, the move was an escape from the relentless grind of city life. For their two teenagers, Sophie and Ben, it was less a fresh start and more an exile to boredom. Still, the prospect of a new chapter softened their initial reluctance. Rustic, Lisa said with a tentative smile as they climbed out of their car, falling apart. Sophie muttered, earning a sharp look from her father. As they began to unload their belongings, a weathered truck pulled up, kicking up dust as it slowed. The driver, a man in his 60s with sun-leathered skin, stepped out and approached. "Name's Earl," he said with a firm handshake. "Welcome to Oak Hollow." David nodded. "Appreciate it, Earl. This place has character." Earl's smile faltered, his gaze drifting to the farmhouse. "Y'all know about the history of this place?" David frowned. "Not much, just that it's been vacant a while." Earl's eyes narrowed slightly. "Vacant's one way to put it. Most folks around here say it's cursed." Lisa let out a nervous laugh. "Cursed? That's quite the local legend." Earl didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low. "You should have let that place rot." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Before they could ask more, Earl tipped his hat and returned to his truck. The McAllisters watched as he drove off, the dust settling in his wake. Inside the house, things were better than they'd expected. The wooden floors creaked and the windows needed a good cleaning, but it felt like a home. The kids claimed their rooms, and by nightfall they were too exhausted to dwell on Earl's ominous warning. The next morning, as the family explored the property, Ben noticed something odd behind the barn, a shed, its wooden door nailed shut with thick boards. "Dad, "What's that?" Ben called. David came over, squinting in the sunlight. "Looks like an old shed, probably full of junk." "Or dead bodies," Sophie teased, rolling her eyes. "Enough," Lisa said sharply. "Ben, don't mess with it. We have enough to deal with unpacking the house." But as they walked away, Ben's curiosity lingered. Something about the shed didn't sit right with him, the way it seemed deliberately sealed, as though someone wanted to keep whatever was inside from ever getting out. Over the next few days, the family settled into a routine, but strange things began to happen. Sophie swore she saw shadows moving in the fields at dusk. Ben complained about hearing faint whispers near the barn. And one night, David thought he saw headlights in the distance, though no vehicle ever appeared. Earl's warning echoed in their minds. Maybe the locals were right. Maybe this farm was more than it seemed. It began subtly at first, just faint noises carried on the night breeze. The McAllisters would be in their beds when they heard it, the low, rhythmic hum of engines, distant but persistent, growing louder as it neared their property. The sound would pass by the house, accompanied by the crunch of gravel before fading into the direction of the barn. "Probably just farm trucks taking a shortcut," David said one morning, brushing off the noises as nothing more than the quirks of rural life. But it wasn't just the noises. The next morning, Sophie, bleary-eyed and annoyed at the early hour, noticed tire tracks cutting through the dirt near the barn. "Shortcut, huh?" she said sarcastically, snapping a picture on her phone. "This is private property," Lisa frowned when Sophie showed her. "David, maybe we should put up a no trespassing sign or something. I don't want strangers wandering around here." "It's probably nothing," David said, though his voice lacked conviction. That evening, Ben, ever the curious one, wandered near the barn to investigate. His flashlight caught the glint of something metallic, discarded cigarette butts scattered across the ground, fresh enough to suggest someone had been there only hours ago. "Dad, this isn't just locals passing by," Ben said later, showing the evidence. "Someone's been here," David sighed. "Fine, I'll check it out tomorrow. Don't let your imagination run wild, okay?" But Ben wasn't satisfied with waiting. The following day, he used his savings to buy a set of motion sensors and a couple of old trail cameras from a nearby hardware store. "What's all this for?" Lisa asked, raising an eyebrow as Ben unloaded the equipment. "To catch whoever's sneaking around," Ben replied, his tone matter-of-fact. That night, Ben carefully set up the cameras around the barn and the shed, angling them to cover as much ground as possible. He placed the motion sensors strategically, their faint red lights blinking in the dark like sentinels. For the first few nights, the family slept soundly, the devices silent. It wasn't until the fourth night that the sensors went off. The piercing beep jolted Ben awake. Grabbing his laptop, he checked the live feed from the cameras. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. Shadowy figures moved in the darkness, their silhouettes faintly illuminated by the moonlight. There were 3 of them, dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured. They moved with precision, working together to unload large, heavy crates from the back of a truck. The faint sound of whispered conversation in a foreign language reached the camera's microphone. Ben's hands trembled as he recorded the footage. He wanted to wake his parents, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen. The figures didn't stay long. Once the crates were unloaded, they disappeared into the shadows, the truck rumbling away moments later. The next morning, Ben showed the footage to his family. "This isn't just some random shortcut," Ben said, his voice tense. "They're using our barn for something, and I don't think it's legal." David's face was pale as he replayed the video. "We need to call the sheriff," he said finally. "But what if they come back?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will," Ben said grimly. "They're not done. And I'm going to find out what's in those crates." The family knew they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than they had imagined. The question was, how deep did it go, and what danger had they unwittingly invited into their lives? David couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him since watching Ben's footage. Something dark was happening on their property, and it was no longer possible to ignore it. The boarded-up shed, which they had dismissed as just another quirk of the aging farm now seemed ominous. The next morning, David grabbed a crowbar and made his way to the shed. The wood planks nailed across the entrance were weathered but sturdy, as if someone had wanted to ensure no one would enter. With each groan of the nails being pried loose, he felt a growing sense of dread. When the last plank came free, David pushed open the door. Dust swirled in the sunlight, and the air inside was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. In the center of the shed were several crates stacked neatly and marked with strange symbols that looked like they might belong to a foreign alphabet. David approached cautiously, prying open the lid of one crate. Inside, he found small black packages wrapped tightly in plastic. He didn't need to open one to guess that the contents were illicit. As he continued searching, something else caught his eye. In a corner of the shed, partially obscured by debris, was a rusted metal box. He pulled it out, finding it heavier than expected. With effort, he opened it to reveal a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. David flipped. Through the journal, the handwriting spidery and uneven, the entries painted a grim picture. This place isn't just a farm anymore. It's become a waypoint. Crates come and go in the dead of night, and I dare not ask what's inside. The men who run this operation are dangerous. They've warned me to keep my mouth shut. One wrong step and they'll make sure I disappear. David's stomach churned as he read further. The entries described years of smuggling, drugs, weapons, and possibly even people. The farm had been repurposed into a hub for criminal activity, and anyone who got in the way paid the price. That night, the McAllisters decided they couldn't wait any longer. Ben convinced his father to set up the cameras again, hoping to catch more evidence. As the hours passed, the family sat in tense silence, listening for the telltale rumble of the truck. It came just after midnight. This time, David and Ben crept outside, hiding behind the tree line to get a closer look. The same truck pulled up to the barn, and the same shadowy figures began unloading crates. David, emboldened by his discovery, stepped out from the shadows. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" The figures froze, their faces partially visible in the dim light. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "You've made a mistake," the man said, his voice cold and menacing. "Turn around, go back to your house, and forget you saw anything." "This is my land," David said, his voice shaking. "You can't just—" The man pulled a gun from his waistband, pointing it directly at David. "You don't understand how this works. Walk away or you'll regret it." Ben, still hidden, recorded everything with his phone, his hands trembling as he captured the confrontation. David backed away slowly, his heart pounding. "We're leaving," he said, his voice barely audible. "We don't want any trouble." The man smirked. Smart choice. Back at the house, the family hurriedly packed their belongings. "We can't stay here," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "They'll kill us if we do." As they piled into their car, David glanced at the shed one last time. He felt a pang of guilt for leaving it all behind, but knew they had no choice. As they drove down the gravel road, the headlights illuminated a moving truck pulling into the property. In the rearview mirror, David saw a smiling couple stepping out, their young children running excitedly toward the house. Lisa gasped. "They don't know." David tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "We can't stop them. Let's just hope they figure it out before it's, too late." The farm grew smaller in the distance, its sinister secrets buried once again, waiting for the next family to uncover them. Story 2. The Well of Shadows. Emma and Jason had dreamed of leaving the city behind, trading the relentless buzz of urban life for the quiet simplicity of a rural homestead. When they found the abandoned farm listed for a price too good to be true, they dismissed their doubts. It was perfect, or so they thought. The farm sat on the outskirts of a small town, nestled between rolling hills and a dense forest. The house, though worn and weathered, had charm. A wraparound porch, sturdy walls, and a view of the fields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The barn stood a little way off, its roof sagging slightly but still intact. "It has so much potential," Emma said as they explored the property, her voice full of hope. Jason nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It's got character, that's for sure. As they began unpacking and setting up their new life, the oddities started to surface. The first was the well. It sat a few yards behind the barn, its edges lined with moss-covered stones. Unlike most wells, this one wasn't just capped. It was sealed with a heavy slab of concrete, reinforced with rusted iron bars. Why would someone go to such lengths to seal it off? Jason wondered aloud. Emma shrugged, brushing off his unease. Probably just safety precautions, we'll figure it out later. But the well wasn't the only strange feature of the property. The barn, though sturdy, had peculiar scratches etched into its wooden beams. Some looked like claw marks, too large to be from any animal they could name. Others were deliberate, carvings, symbols and shapes that neither of them recognized. That's weird, Jason said, tracing a jagged line with his fingers. You think the last owners were into some kind of rituals? Emma laughed nervously. Probably just kids messing around. Let's not jump to conclusions. Despite their attempts to focus on renovations, the peculiarities weighed on them. At night, the farm's stillness became unsettling. The usual sounds of country life, crickets, the rustle of leaves, the occasional owl, seemed muted, replaced by an eerie quiet. Then came the whispers. The first night they heard them, Emma thought it was the wind. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as faint, indistinct voices floated through the open window. She shook Jason awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Jason groaned, sitting up and listening. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A murmuring that seemed to rise and fall like a distant conversation. "It's probably just the wind through the trees," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. But as the nights passed, the whispers grew clearer. They seemed to emanate from the direction of the well, carrying an unplaceable language, their cadence almost hypnotic. One night, Jason couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, determined to prove it was nothing. Emma followed reluctantly, clutching his arm. The air was cool, and the moon cast long shadows across the property. As they approached the well, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, though still incomprehensible. Jason's hand trembled as he shone the flashlight over the sealed well. The beam illuminated the rough surface of the concrete slab and the rusted iron bars. Emma gasped. "Jason, look!" Carved into the edge of the concrete were the same symbols they had seen in the barn, but these looked freshly etched, the lines sharp and clean. "This doesn't make sense," Jason muttered, stepping back. The whispers suddenly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on them. Emma grabbed his arm. "Let's go back inside now." Reluctantly, Jason nodded and they retreated to the house, locking the doors and pulling the curtains tight. As they sat in the kitchen, the weight of the silence was broken by a distant thud. It came from the direction of the well. Emma's eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" Jason nodded, his face pale. "Something's not right here." For the first time, the couple began to question the wisdom of their fresh start. The farm's charm was giving way to something darker, something that whispered not of promise but of warnings left unheeded. The whispers persisted, weaving unease into the fabric of Emma and Jason's new life. Sleep came fitfully, and the daylight hours were consumed with an unspoken tension. It was during one of these restless days that Jason suggested something that Emma couldn't believe she agreed to. "I think we should open the well," he said over breakfast, his tone hesitant but firm. "If we're going to fix this place up, we need to know what we're dealing with." Emma hesitated, staring at the steaming mug of coffee in her hands. The well's heavy concrete slab had become a symbol of their unease, a Pandora's box. They'd rather leave sealed, but curiosity, and perhaps a need for control, won out. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "But let's be careful." With crowbars and determination, they approached the well. The iron bars groaned as Jason pried them loose, each screeching noise sending shivers down their spines. Emma stood nearby with a flashlight, her knuckles white around the handle. As they removed the concrete slab, a musty, fetid smell wafted up, causing Emma to gag. Jason, pale but resolute, aimed his flashlight down into the darkness. The well wasn't dry, but the water level was surprisingly low, revealing murky depths. At first, they saw nothing unusual, just moss-covered stone walls slick with moisture. But then Jason's beam caught something. "There's something down there," he said, his voice tight. Emma peered over the edge. Floating just above the water were several bags tightly sealed in what looked like waterproof material. "We need to get those out," Jason said. Using a makeshift pulley system, they managed to hoist the bags one by one. Their weight and the strange squishing sounds they made as they hit the ground unnerved them. Jason hesitated before opening the first one, his hands trembling. Inside were bones. Human bones. Emma gasped, stumbling back as Jason stared in horrified silence. The femur, ribs, and skulls were unmistakable, their edges darkened with age but hauntingly intact. The second bag revealed cash, bundles of it wrapped in plastic and bearing dates from decades ago. The currency was old yet perfectly preserved. The third bag was the most chilling. Inside were faded photographs. Jason picked one up, his hands shaking. These are missing persons," he whispered. Emma leaned in, her eyes scanning the photographs. The faces were smiling. Some posed with their families, others candid as if caught in a fleeting moment of joy. A knot formed in her stomach. These were people who had vanished, whose faces had likely been plastered on posters and milk cartons long forgotten. Jason's flashlight caught the corner of a small, leather-bound diary nestled among the photos. He pulled it out and opened, it revealing spidery handwriting that filled the pages. As Emma read over his shoulder, the story unfolded. The diary belonged to a man named Charles Wyatt, a mid-level operative in a local crime syndicate that had once controlled the area. The farm, according to the entries, had been a dumping ground for those who crossed the syndicate. Victims were disposed of in the well, their belongings destroyed or hidden. One entry chilled them to the core. "They say the well keeps the whispers of those who fall into its depths. I hear them at night, but I tell myself it's the wind. They can't hurt me. They're dead, aren't they?" Emma clutched Jason's arm, her voice a trembling whisper. "Jason, we have to leave. This place, it's cursed." Jason nodded, his face pale but determined. "Not yet. We need to report this. These people deserve justice." But deep down, both of them knew the well held more than just secrets. The whispers weren't merely echoes of the past. They were warnings, and they were only growing louder. The quiet aftermath of their discovery felt heavier than the night air pressing down on them. The bones, the cash, the photographs, they were all stark reminders of the nightmare they had unearthed. Emma and Jason knew that exposing the truth was the only way to break the chains of fear tightening around them. But they were not prepared for the chain of events that would unfold next. The couple wasted no time in contacting the authorities. Emma had a gut feeling that the local sheriff's department was involved somehow, but they needed help. She clutched her phone, dialing the number with trembling hands. "We found human remains," she said shakily, "and evidence of a crime ring operating on our property. You need to send someone." Jason, standing behind her, couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. The house, once so quiet and peaceful, felt suffocating now. The walls seemed to close in on him, the shadows creeping at the edge of his vision. But when the sheriff's deputy arrived that afternoon, it was like the world had shifted. His demeanor was all too calm, too practiced, as if he already knew what they had found. Emma noticed his eyes flicker nervously as he glanced at the spot where they had pulled the bags from the well. "We'll take it from here," he said smoothly, his voice carrying a subtle undercurrent of warning. "You two should take a break, get some rest." But they didn't feel rested. They didn't feel safe. The deputy was gone in a matter of minutes, and so were the bags. Emma and Jason rushed to the well, but it was empty. The bags, the bones, the photographs, they had vanished as if they had never existed at all. Jason's stomach churned. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had made sure that evidence would never see the light of day. As night fell, the unease in their home grew unbearable. The air was thick with the sense that something or someone was lurking just out of sight. They couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever dark force they had awakened was beginning to reach out. Then, at 10 p.m. sharp, the knock came. It wasn't loud or forceful, but the sound reverberated through the silence like a drumbeat of impending doom. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she looked at Jason. Neither of them moved for several seconds. The knock came again, this time accompanied by a low voice calling through the door. "We're here to talk." Jason grabbed the nearest object, a sturdy metal rod, and quietly approached the door. He cracked it open a fraction. Outside stood two men in plain clothes, their faces unreadable. They flashed badges, but there was something off about them, too polished, too perfect. Their eyes were intense, locked onto Jason and Emma with an unsettling focus. "We're with the police," one of the men said, his voice calm, yet laced with something dangerous. "We need to ask you a few questions. It's in your best interest to cooperate." "Is this about the bodies we found in the well?" Emma demanded, stepping forward. Her pulse was racing. The two men exchanged a glance. The first one smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You should be careful about what you say," he warned in a tone that was much too polite. "There are people who don't like having their secrets exposed. People who will do anything to protect them." Jason felt a chill run through him as the man's smile deepened, becoming more unsettling. They weren't here for answers, they were here to intimidate. The conversation dragged on, with the strangers barely saying a word more. They didn't leave until they made it clear in the subtlest of ways that Emma and Jason should keep their mouths shut. As they turned to leave, the taller of the two gave a slow nod, almost as if to say, "We're watching you." The door slammed, shut behind them, and Emma's legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the couch, her breathing quick and shallow. Jason stood by the window, watching their retreating figures. "Who were they?" Emma whispered. Jason didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that the shadow of danger had only grown darker. Over the next few days, the couple received more messages, anonymous, cryptic warnings urging them to leave the farm. Some arrived by email, others by letter, but all carried the same chilling message: "Leave now or you won't leave at all." Fear gnawed at them. It wasn't just the warnings. It was the silence that followed them. The sense that the well had somehow become more than just a place, a malevolent presence that watched their every move. The walls felt suffocating again. The house was no longer a home, but a prison. And the farm, its secrets had begun to consume them. It didn't take long for them to make a decision. The farm and everything tied to it had become too dangerous. They packed their belongings, loaded up their car, and fled, their hearts pounding with the need to escape. But as they drove away, a sense of dread lingered in the air. The road stretched endlessly before them, but it wasn't the open road that gave them relief. It was the rearview mirror. At first, Emma thought it was just a trick of the light. But as the image became clearer, her breath caught in her throat. In the distance by the well stood the two strangers. Their faces, frozen in grim smiles, were no longer human. Their features had blurred and distorted, as though they were not quite of this world. They were watching, waiting, and as Emma and Jason sped away, the whispers began once more, louder now, echoing in the spaces between their hearts. As the stories of these two farms come to an end, one cannot help but step back and reflect on the deeper themes that underlie each tale. Both stories reveal a stark truth about human nature and the places we inhabit. At first glance, these farms appear to be serene retreats, sanctuaries of simplicity and escape from the chaos of modern life. But beneath the surface lies an unsettling reality. Perceived safety in these isolated places is often an illusion. Both stories serve as a chilling reminder that the past, with all its sins and secrets, lingers, waiting to emerge at the most unexpected moments. The first farm, hidden behind boarded-up sheds and shadowy figures, represents how history can manifest in dangerous and often invisible ways. The smugglers and silent warnings lay beneath the surface, buried deep until someone disturbs them. It's a haunting commentary on how ignorance of history can entangle even the most unsuspecting individuals in perilous circumstances. Similarly, the second farm, once a home for those who disappeared into its well, illustrates how forgotten crimes fester, left undisturbed until someone disturbs their grave. The bones, cache, and photos uncovered beneath the stones remind us that places, even those seemingly abandoned, carry their own weight of past suffering. The well, once a source of water, becomes a vessel for the sins of decades past, a symbol of dark deeds buried in silence. Both stories are woven from the threads of real-life experiences, echoes of unsolved mysteries and hidden dangers lurking in remote places. There is an eeriness in knowing that these tales, though fictionalized here, are rooted in true accounts of abandoned places where darkness lingers unseen. The narrator, observing from the edges of these two stories, offers a sobering reflection. The farm, once considered a simple, quiet place to live, transforms into something far more complex. What seems ordinary on the surface can become a trap where the past's shadows stretch into the present. The barn, the well, even the quiet roads, each becomes a vessel for memories and secrets that should have been forgotten long ago. The narrator leaves readers with an unsettling question. If you think your home has no history, are you sure you've looked deep enough? This question lingers, prompting reflection on the places we inhabit. How many homes, farms, or even neighborhoods hide histories we've never taken the time to uncover? What if beneath the surface of your own surroundings lies a story of the past, waiting to be uncovered, ready to change everything you thought you knew about where you live? These stories remind us that even in the quietest corners of the world, the past is never truly gone. The well of shadows, the dark corners of barns, and the unnoticed footsteps in the night all carry the weight of forgotten histories. The legacy left behind is not one of safety, but of mystery, an endless cycle of truths waiting to be revealed. In the end, these stories offer more than just a sense of fear. They are cautionary tales, urging us to consider not only what we see, but what we may be missing. Each abandoned home, each isolated farm, might hold more than just a place of peace. It could hold the remnants of lives long past, the burdens of secrets never told. As the stories close, the haunting echoes of these places remain, lingering in the minds of those who dare to listen. The past, like an unseen force, continues to breathe life into forgotten spaces, waiting for the right moment to remind us that there is always more to uncover. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all, that the past never truly rests. It simply waits for the right moment to surface.